2024, I played some video games. I know, crazy, I don't remember that ever happening before. In fact, if my count is correct, I beat 32 video games I have never played before throughout 2024, though this list adds up to 33 because I included a very special remake in there too. That might be the most games I've ever played for the first time in a single year. I figured after all that playing, it might be a good idea to put something out into the world too. So I'm making a little short video talking about those games and how they made me feel. In case it wasn't clear already, this isn't a list of games that were released in 2024 that I played. That would be a much shorter video if that were the case. I find that I don't often play too many games the year that they come out, because gaming is an expensive and time-consuming hobby. So I've always had to pick and choose which new releases I want to prioritize over others. Beyond that though, my video game experience in 2024 was largely defined by all the older games I worked through, and so I decided it would be much more worthwhile to explore my relationship with all of the games I experienced this year that I had not already finished. Since that list includes over 30 games, I'll include a list of timestamps to each game in the description below, so you can hop around to whatever games you're interested in. The games are placed in the order I played them last year, and I'll mark any games that I spoil with a spoiler warning both in the description and within the video itself, so that you can easily avoid them. With that said, I see no point wasting any more time. These are the games I played in 2024. Four years ago, I played my first ever Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I immediately fell in love with the game's world and characters, and was eager to know what was going to happen next in the story by the time I rolled credits on the remake. So eager, in fact, that it took me almost a full 4 years to actually play the original Final Fantasy VII, until January of 2024. I'm not quite sure what kept me from diving into FF7. Maybe it was just daunting staring down the barrel of another 40-hour RPG. I often get scared off by longer games. Maybe it was the age of FF7. The game is almost 30 years old, and I think a part of me was concerned that I'd struggle with antiquated controls or design. Or maybe it was because it was Final Fantasy VII, one of the most culturally significant games of all time. Not only is this game often considered one of the most important games ever made, it's also often considered one of the best, and I find myself hesitant when approaching games with that status. I still remember playing Ocarina of Time for the first time when I was a kid and being disappointed by it after years of hearing that it was the greatest game ever made, and it took me years to come around to the game and eventually learn to enjoy and respect it. Whenever a game has this icon status, I wonder what in the game earned it that status, and my thoughts spiral into expectations that the people playing the game when it first released didn't have. I was afraid my expectations of the original FF7 would be tainted in this way, especially having played the very modern and polished first part of the remake. And you know what? I was a little disappointed at first. Or maybe disappointed isn't the right word for it, but the game just wasn't clicking with me. I worked through the opening act in Midgar and couldn't shake this feeling of being underwhelmed, knowing how much the remake had expanded on Midgar's setting, its characters, its boss fights. Final Fantasy VII's version of this location felt very unimpressive in comparison, lacking the gravitas of Remake's higher production value to really bolster its emotional beats. I found myself growing increasingly concerned that I just wouldn't be into this game, especially with the anxiety of knowing that the party was eventually going to leave Midgar and be thrust into a giant open world that lacked the snappier pacing of the game's opening moments. Then I got to Calm, and I played through Cloud's backstory, and I kept playing, and kept playing. I played for 6 hours in a row one day, 8 hours another. When I wasn't playing Final Fantasy VII, I was thinking about playing Final Fantasy VII, and by the time I rolled credits on this game, it had made it into my top 20 favorite games of all time. Holy shit, guys. It really is that good. All of my fears about the game's pacing slowing down evaporated as soon as I left Midgar. I was consistently astounded by the frenetic pace of FF7, how the party bounces from insane situations or interesting locales and spends the perfect amount of time dealing with each before moving on. And these locales, man, the world of FF7 is just so fun. There's so much packed into this 30-year-old PS1 game, yet the world is still so thematically cohesive and naturally extends itself for the first half of the experience. The way the game familiarizes you with all of its geography and important locations before everything goes to shit and you have to frantically dash back around the world again, solving problems while death looms overhead, was genius. I really underestimated the impact of experiencing this story's twists for the first time. It makes complete sense why Midgar failed to really grab my attention when I already played through all the key events there in the remake. Even knowing some of the crazy shit that would go down later in the game, it was the way those pivotal scenes were presented that left me surprised and eager to find out what would happen next. What's beautiful about Final Fantasy VII is how this absurd story is all brought together thematically. You explore a giant world, go on this massive journey, and learn about so many different cultures and people. You recruit a cat, a ninja, and a vampire to fight with you on your journey, and I fell in love with each of them over the course of that journey. You fight a kaiju to stop it from destroying Midgar, and have fun at the amusement park with your friends, and all of this enforces the idea of life being precious and beautiful. It's what makes Aerith's death so tragic, and what makes the Deus Ex Machina moment at the end of the story where she assumes control of the life stream and uses it to stop meteors so powerful. We watch as life, figuratively and literally, overcomes that looming death. There's so much more I have to praise about Final Fantasy VII. The versatile combat, the gorgeous pre-rendered backdrops, the all-timer soundtrack by Nobuo Uematsu, but much of it has been said before, and I'll probably end up saying it again later if I make a video on this game, so I'll just say Final Fantasy VII was one of my favorite gaming experiences I had in 2024, and the best game I played for the first time last year. Starting out on a high note, I know. I'd never played a FromSoft Souls-like before last year, but I've always felt drawn to them. I knew someday I would get around to them, and that's probably why I've bought all of them physically over the years and let them collect dust on my shelves. I decided I want to play them in order because I like seeing the way franchises evolve from game to game. And I had also heard that Demon's Souls isn't the hardest Souls-like game out there, which was reassuring enough for me that I dove headfirst into it in the beginning of February. Similar to Final Fantasy VII, this is a game that didn't fully click with me at first, but unlike Final Fantasy VII, that was purely because of the difficulty. These games encourage a very specific style of play that I wasn't fully accustomed to at first, and it took me a few play sessions to even make it through the very first segment of the first area. Honestly, I'll admit that when I was first playing the game, I had to force myself to continue playing past like a half hour or so. I wouldn't even get frustrated with each death, but rather bored or despondent. It wasn't discouraging enough to get me to want to put the game down, but it felt exhausting. As my playthrough continued though, I found that boredom was starting to fade, turning to curiosity. This was in large part owed to the bosses. They were just really creative, and that's one thing that I will absolutely give Demon's Souls. It has some of the most insane concepts for boss fights I have ever seen in a game. There's some truly mind-blowing stuff here that I would not want to spoil. I don't know if later games in the Souls series have more straightforward, traditional battles in them, but I did really appreciate how a lot of these fights had a sort of gimmick to them, and they almost functioned as puzzles, which was really cool even if it removed some of the difficulty from certain encounters once you solved said puzzle. It took me a while to clear Boletaria and the mines, which was partially my fault. I approached the game wanting to play through each area uninterrupted rather than bouncing between them like you're clearly meant to. This approach did help me to drastically improve, however. Clearing Flame Lurker and later King Allant were some of the toughest things I had to do in a game all year, but fighting them and running through their levels over and over got me a lot less anxious, and I managed to get my dodge and parry and heal timing down. And once I had made it through those first two areas, I was fully in it. By that point, I was feeling confident enough in my ability that I wanted to just keep going during that sitting and see how far I could make it. Turns out that would be the end of the game. I shit you not, I played this game for 9 hours straight. A disgusting amount of time. I back to back beat areas 3, 4, and 5, with very few deaths might I add, and I was into it, man. Just like FF7, something about it had just clicked. The settings of these grim, moody levels are so perfectly mirrored by their stage designs. They're very unorthodox, and oftentimes I'd find myself confused by why a stage is laid out in a certain way, but it's all in service of atmosphere and world building. This is really exemplified by areas like the Swamp of Sorrow or the Tower of Latria. The swamp is just this massive, empty stretch of murky brown water filled with enemies, and the only way out are these bits of scaffolding lining the sides of towering cliffs. This area is supposed to be just a cesspool of filth and grime, and this exposing level design where you're just flanked on all sides by slime monsters really made me feel that. I've never wanted to get the fuck out of a place more in a game. Then you have this genius moment where you reach the end boss of the area, and it's just this saint, Maiden Astraea, and her appointed knight Garl Vinland chilling with a bunch of fucking miscarried babies. It's disturbing and uncomfortable conceptually, but what's more disturbing is how easy the fight is. You tear through Garl in seconds like he's just another enemy, and then Astraea ends her own life before you can even attack her. You get the picture that these two have just been rotting away down here for who knows how long, and it makes you feel really awful killing them, especially because Garl won't even attack you unless you get close enough to Astraea. This game does such a good job conveying the personalities of its bosses through little details in their fights, which kept me hooked on it because I wanted to see what all of them were like. And Demon's Souls is one of those games that gets better the more I think about it, and just playing the first level to gather footage for this video got me in the mood to run the whole game back again. I am beyond excited to finally play more FromSoft games this year, and from what I've heard, they only get better after Demon's Souls. Maybe a year from now you'll be hearing me sing the praises of Dark Souls in my 2025 recap. This shit sucks, man. I am a big fan of the Donkey Kong Country games, the original trilogy by Rare and the modern revivals by Retro. They are irrefutably some of the greatest platformer games of all time. Hell, I'd say DKC2 and Tropical Freeze are just some of the greatest games of all time, full stop, and that doesn't seem to be a very controversial opinion. I am also a big fan of Banjo-Kazooie. Rare looked at Mario 64 and answered it with a slower paced game with more detailed visuals, expressive characters, and varied challenges to complete. It feels like Rare just had a knack for making fun platformer games, and a 3D Donkey Kong Country game that applies lessons learned from Banjo seemed like it would be a dream game for me. Yet as a kid, I never made it past the second world. Picking the game back up in February of last year, I understand why. Donkey Kong 64 is a fucking nightmare video game. The density of Banjo-Kazooie's world design has been diluted, replaced with long, empty corridors that you have to scurry back and forth between for hours in every level. People seem to be under the impression that DK64 would be magically fixed if you could just swap Kongs on the fly so you can grab their specific collectibles without having to haul ass back to the tag barrel, but I disagree. These levels are so empty, so devoid of interesting platforming, that all this change would do is make them less tedious, not more fun. It feels like the only thing you do in this fuck-ass game is play the same 5 half-baked minigames over and over again because Rare was putting out 5 games a year at this time. In Donkey Kong Country, you jump on the beaver characters, and that's it. In Donkey Kong 64, you have to turn yourself into an alligator and then play a minigame programmed by an actual alligator where you push 50 beavers into a hole, except if you don't have the perfect angle, the beavers just activate the invisible wall and walk around the hole instead, and you have to do this perfectly and get every beaver in the hole 3 different times if you want to 100% the game. This whole game is just a long checklist of mundane bullshit. Rare pushed the collectathon mentality that they basically codified alongside Mario 64 to its extreme and created a game all about collecting, but they forgot everything else. I'm the type of guy who loves collecting things in games. 3D platformers are like my favorite genre ever, but collecting stuff ceases to be satisfying when there's nothing interesting happening beyond the collecting. I don't like this game very much, I regret 100% completing it, and it's one of the very few titles I do not see myself ever returning to again. Shadow of the Colossus is a transcendent work. Not only is it a top 5 game for me, it was a formative experience. Playing it for the first time in 6th grade, it taught me so much about my own tastes in art. It revealed my love of minimalism and also, ironically, my love of spectacle, and my love of both as a means of storytelling. But more importantly, it revealed my love of storytelling through emotion. The story of Shadow of the Colossus is very simple. You just have to revive a dead girl by killing colossi. But that isn't really the story, it's the premise. The story is how the process of killing those colossi made me feel. It's fucking crazy then that I had not played the predecessor to Team Ico's Shadow of Colossus, simply titled Ico, until February of 2024. Ico is a much tougher sell than Shadow, and I suspect this is why I put off playing it for so long. Instead of scaling and toppling big monsters with a sword, you're leading a girl around an abandoned castle and solving puzzles for 5 hours. There's no music, no tutorials, hardly any dialogue, the controls are clunky, the combat sucks, and Ico is a brilliant game. Without anything to distract you other than the ambiance of the castle, your very limited moveset, which basically just includes jump, push, climb, and swing stick, and the occasional bunch of shadows that show up to fuck with you a little bit, you're locked in on the relationship between Ico and Yorda. There aren't any corny scenes where you watch their bond grow. Instead, your bond grows every time Yorda barely makes a risky jump and you pull her up a ledge, or when you rescue her from the shadows at the very last second, or when you scream at her for being a dumbass. Even frustration isn't often a distraction, as the game designers work with a consolidated kit of mechanics and keep remixing them in different ways to keep them interesting. The game isn't always smooth. There were moments where Yorda's AI kind of bugged out and made me think that she couldn't go somewhere that she actually could, but this is for the most part a very intelligently designed world. There's just something about these games, man. The architecture, the lighting, the character and creature designs, it all speaks to me in a way that is very hard to articulate. I just love Fumito Ueda's creative vision. There's something very resonant about the experiences he crafts, with a focus on making players feel through the smallest moments, like watching the blades of a windmill slowly spin on the edge of a grassy cliffside. This whole game builds up to one of the most moving moments I've ever experienced in any video game, so subtly set up throughout the entire journey, yet it completely blindsided me and left me totally speechless. This is another one that I didn't want to spoil because the way it recontextualized everything really sold me on the game. I wouldn't call Ico one of my favorites like I would with Shadow of the Colossus, but just like Shadow of the Colossus, I think it's a game everyone should experience at some point if they have a serious appreciation for the medium. Now I just gotta play Last Guardian at some point. I'm a little scared to pick that game up. I've heard mixed things, but I have faith in Ueda. He's one of my favorite creatives working in the games industry today. Ooh, I've been waiting for this. Sonic Mania is another one of my top 5 games ever, and I have been eagerly awaiting the next project from the immensely talented developers behind that game, Evening Star, for almost 7 years now. Was the wait worth it? Don't ask stupid questions. Penny has the flow of 2D Sonic, with the score attack of 3D Sonic, with the movement of 3D Mario, with the combo system from Tony Hawk. You already know this is a banger. I had so much fun playing a game that scratched both the itch for a new expressive momentum-based platformer after dumping actually hundreds of hours into Sonic Mania, as well as the itch for a tight, score-focused ranking system that the 3D Sonic games used to deliver. I was getting diabolical on these stages. There is so much crazy shit you can do with Penny's movement, which feels so unique from every other platformer character out there. I was riding across lava to skip whole chunks of a level, dropping down on slopes after a huge fall to go speeding away, doing loop-de-loops with Penny's yo-yo. The skill floor is admittedly pretty high, but take the time to learn the movement and you can't even see the skill ceiling because they forgot it. Then you put T-Lopes on the soundtrack? I hate to keep glazing Sonic Mania. Nah, I lied, I don't at all. But I obsessively listened to the music from that game for years. T managed to make a soundtrack just as good as that shit, while also providing an entirely unique texture befitting of the more surreal, nonsensical nature of Penny's world. This was a great year for video game music across the board, but Penny is certainly a highlight for me. I feel like I haven't listened to the soundtrack enough. I don't even want to keep yapping about this game because it's just making me want to play it again. Penny's Big Breakaway is some of the most fun I'd had with a game all last year. There was joy distilled into the art and the music and the animation and the stage gimmicks and everything. I'm really disappointed to hear that the game underperformed and Evening Star had to lay off a few of their employees as a result. I hope if you take anything away from this video, it's to go buy Penny's Big Breakaway right now and play it. It comes from some of the most talented and passionate indie developers working right now, and I'd hate to see them continue to face financial hardship, especially after how much joy they've given me through their games. I hope their next game performs a lot better, and I will be there day one to play it. I played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in March of 2024. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the most conflicted I have ever felt about a video game. Never before has my experience with a game been so magical, brought me so much joy, and actually brought me to tears twice, yet simultaneously frustrated and disappointed me repeatedly, saving its greatest failure for its final moments. I struggle to even write about the game here because I could just ramble for hours about specific moments where I was delighted or dumbfounded. FF7 Rebirth is fun. So much fun. I went on an epic, beautiful journey with a cast of characters who felt like my close friends, played hundreds of lovingly crafted minigames, and fought enemies using a combat system that expertly balances strategy and dexterity in an addictive and near-perfect harmony. I found myself grinning from ear to ear listening to the unfathomably large and varied soundtrack and taking in the stunning recreated scenery, the original game still fresh in my mind. I no-lifed this game. I only had one in-person course during my spring semester at community college that met for like a few hours once every week, so I spent days on end doing nothing but playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I haven't gotten this absorbed into a game since Tears of the Kingdom in 2023. And yet, ironically enough, I almost find myself more disappointed with Rebirth than I do with Tears of the Kingdom. Where Tears of the Kingdom's shortcomings could easily be overlooked as a misstep in a franchise that will continue pumping out games for decades, I couldn't help but feel that Rebirth's nature as a remake of FF7 makes it a squandered opportunity, an opportunity that likely won't present itself again anytime soon, if ever. By taking Final Fantasy VII and modernizing it, the team have also homogenized much of it to fit in with the rest of the modern AAA space. Poignant or otherwise experimental moments from the original game are mixed into spectacle soup, where subtlety is lost to raw excitement. Despite how over-the-top JRPGs often are, Final Fantasy VII included, the original FF7 also showed a surprising amount of restraint in telling a complex and nuanced coming-of-age story, whereas Rebirth derives its complexity from confusion. I so desperately want to enjoy Rebirth as its own thing divorced from Final Fantasy VII, but the meta nature of the remake's narrative demands that I approach it with the original in mind, and doing so only highlights the difference in storytelling quality between both experiences. Even taken on its own, Rebirth suffocates itself in a sea of bog-standard open-world busywork and moments of absurd tonal whiplash that would likely leave even a newcomer to this world conflicted on the final product. I want so desperately to love what this game is trying to be, but I am becoming increasingly disillusioned with the creative direction the remake project is taking. I'll hold my tongue at least a little bit until the third part releases and I can chew on the entire story, but so far I'm left wishing the team didn't take things as far as they did. In other news, Princess Peach got a game. It was fine. This one should be much easier to talk about. I played Princess Peach Showtime in March, and I liked it fine enough. It's the newest game from developer Goodfeel, and it certainly shows. It has all of their hallmarks from the inspired visual direction to the simplistic gameplay. Peach is clearly aimed at younger audiences, but unlike most Nintendo games, it isn't something that can be fully enjoyed by people of any age. Yeah, I'm a 20-year-old man. You could say I wasn't the target audience for a game like this, but then I find that odd. How come every other Nintendo series is fun for anyone? You don't see people saying 7-year-old girls aren't the target audience for Kirby games because they can enjoy them as well as I can. Playing Showtime, I was constantly thinking about how it essentially plays like a Kirby game, with a bevy of unique transformations with their own toolkits that you can swap between from level to level. The difference is that Kirby transformations have a lot of advanced movement options and aren't often forced on the player. Meanwhile, Peach's transformations are overly simplistic and are always mandatory, so there's no learning curve and no depth. It kinda sucks that older women who enjoy Peach aren't given a game that respects their intelligence in the same way a Mario game would. Hell, it kinda sucks that young girls aren't being given that kinda game. It feels a bit misguided, let's just say, to take the one Mario spin-off starring a woman and make it the only one that is dumbed down for children. Yoshi games are easy, sure, but they offer considerably more depth and challenge than Peach's equivalent. I'm a bit bummed that an opportunity to give Peach a game considered just as masterful as Yoshi's Island, Luigi's Mansion, or Donkey Kong Country was wasted because the developers didn't think little girls are smart enough to play video games. Still, I didn't dislike my time with this game. It was cute. The variety of transformations kept things interesting. I also liked all the different outfits Peach changed into when she transformed. Honestly though, even ignoring the occasional boredom brought about by the lack of depth, I don't think this game is all that well designed. I tried going for the 100% and there were so many moments where I couldn't tell the difference between an optional side path leading to some goodies and the way forward. The game constantly locked me out from returning to previous parts of stages, forcing me to play those stages from beginning to end 2 or 3 times to nab all the collectibles. For a game as baby-coded as this, it's surprisingly harsh in how little wiggle room it gives completionists. You can bet I stopped playing for good when I beat the game and saw that additional collectibles had been added to every single level, which meant replaying every level again. So yeah, it's cool that Peach got a game again, but if they're all gonna be this deliberately middling, I'd rather she just stick to the main series. Spurred on by an impromptu replay of the original Castlevania on NES, I downloaded the Castlevania Classic Collection on my Switch for a pittance and checked out Super Castlevania IV in early April. The aesthetic of Castlevania has always vaguely appealed to me, but I have to admit I never really gave the franchise a shot outside of playing the first game, like 7 years ago. Something about Castlevania just put me off, and I could never quite place my finger on what exactly that is. I'm having an even more difficult time figuring that out now that I've played Castlevania IV, because this game is extraordinary. The thing I liked most about the original Castlevania was the satisfaction of nailing down a run through a stage. Checkpoints are generously placed at the beginning of each major area, so you only have to redo 5 to 6 minutes of gameplay when you game over. Some of the levels in the original game felt borderline impossible on a first run. I'd just be getting dogpiled by enemies and barely scraping my way to the boss with 1 life, only for them to one-shot me. But over time, I would chip away at a level, clear a room without losing health for the first time, keep a powerful sub-weapon for longer than usual, find a hidden health refill, all the while slowly learning the movement of the enemies and getting better at avoiding them. This combo of pattern recognition and memorization is what makes that eventual perfect run where the stars align and you finally grab the famous Castlevania orb so glorious. Castlevania IV nails this shit even better than the original. Every level felt like it was just difficult enough that I could never coast through on my first try, but I always knew they weren't insurmountable. There are no absurd difficulty spikes like in the original, just a steady incline of challenge from level to level with hazards that gradually become more punishing over time without ever feeling cheap. Simon's improved mid-air control over the original Castlevania did a lot of legwork in encouraging me to continue playing, since there were no moments where I got fucked by some dickhead waiting just off screen midway through a jump because I was locked out of moving Simon until he landed. Really though, it's just the setting of Castlevania IV that kept me going. The original Castlevania was already one of the most impressive games visually on the NES, and the extra power of the Super Nintendo allowed the team to really show off what they're capable of. In the original game, you just start off in the halls of Dracula's castle. 4 uses its status as a pseudo-retelling of that original to expand on it, having this multiple level-long journey to Dracula's castle through caves and rivers before you eventually arrive at the front gates while this foreboding track plays. I can't even describe the elation I felt going through those first 5 levels and realizing I had only just reached the castle. It was unreal. The sense of dread stepping into the castle for the first time after getting my ass beat by the level just before it was insane. And yeah, Dracula's castle is pretty brutal, but it's also so sick. The original game already had some real variety for an NES title, but 4 just goes wild once you hit this point. There's a torture chamber, and a clock tower, and a treasury with skeletons made of gold. It's a game very much like Demon's Souls, where the difficulty is high, but the intrigue is higher, and so I just had to see what was next. The game is only 2 hours, but it crams more interesting set pieces and boss fights and music in that time than most 40-hour games can manage. This shit was so good, so well paced that the night after I beat the game, I ran through it again in one sitting. I never do that with games that aren't Sonic. I played a lot more Castlevania throughout the year and didn't enjoy most of it, but this game was so good that it single-handedly made me a fan of the series and provided me with enough goodwill to stick through the horrific lows that these games stoop to. Hey, speaking of which... Sucks. It sucks. I also played through this in early April, right after finishing Castlevania IV. I decided that I wanted to play through every major Classicvania, Game Boy titles included, before hitting the Metroidvania entries. I was also morbidly curious seeing the awful reception this game had, and hey, apparently it's only an hour long? Fuck it. Well, yeah, fuck it was right. This game blows. I don't even have anything new to say about it for the unfortunate bunch who have already experienced or heard about Castlevania the Adventure. It's the first Game Boy Castlevania game, so it looks like shit, plays worse, and only has 4 levels. I played the whole thing laying in bed after pulling an all-nighter, and it's hard to think of a more miserable gaming experience I had all year than slogging through the final level 8 times after being up for 20 hours straight, because the devs thought it would be funny to spam the first level boss like 5 times in a row in a lead up to the final boss, who moves faster than your player character, might I add. Anything moves faster than your player character, actually. I was surprised to learn after beating this game that Christopher Belmont is not 90 years old, because moving him around feels like you forgot to take the iron boots off in Ocarina of Time. This is also the game that has multiple do-or-die platforming and chase sequences in every level, where almost every hazard kills you in one hit. Fuck this game, man. I'm not even talking about it anymore. I have heard nothing but praise heaped onto Celeste for the past 6 years. It was, for a time, the only 2D platformer game ever to be nominated for Game of the Year. Unless you count Mario Maker, but that's like half Toolbox, so I don't. I constantly heard about how precise the controls are, how the difficulty is deliciously brutal but simultaneously very forgiving, and most enticing of all, how the story is actually good. For a die-hard platformer fan like myself, this seemed like the perfect game for me. Yet I never felt particularly drawn to it, like I needed to play it. I knew someday I would, and eventually, in April, that day came. So was it worth the hype? If you had asked me right after finishing the game, I would have said yes, absolutely. Celeste gets pretty much everything right when it comes to making a good platformer. Stage mechanics are expertly introduced and iterated upon throughout a stage, made immediately intuitive through clever visual design, and eventually combined in the late game to create some devious challenges. Madeline's moveset is, as I said before, ultra precise, simplistic on the surface, but with insane speedrunning tech built into it that can break levels apart when used creatively. The art direction is gorgeous, the music is phenomenal, and the story is a real story, something I've always clamored for more of in platformer games. I love when this genre actually gets ambitious with its storytelling. Klonoa 2 and Sonic Adventure 2 are 2 of my favorite games, and a lot of my appreciation for those titles comes from their sincere interest in storytelling and character development. Celeste, more than anything, is an awesome game for how it cleverly weaves a story with themes of self-doubt and anxiety into an experience all about overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges by pushing forward through small, condensed challenge rooms one at a time. It feels like the core game design reinforces this thematic idea of tackling your anxiety by breaking it down into digestible chunks and pushing yourself forward through each one individually, using your past successes to motivate you to keep pushing until you reach the top of your own summit. It's the reason why the game's final level, where Madeline gets knocked all the way back down to the bottom of Celeste Mountain and has to work with her anxiety and self-doubt personified to climb all the way back up, is so emotionally effective. It's inspiring spending a whole game watching her slowly and anxiously work her way through difficult platforming challenge after difficult platforming challenge, and then when she's beaten down, instead of giving up, she tears her way back up the mountain in one long, uninterrupted level that combines the themes and ideas of every single stage in the game to... Damn. Fuck, I gotta start writing shorter sentences. It's inspiring spending a whole game watching her slowly and anxiously work her way through difficult platforming challenge after difficult platforming challenge, and then when she's beaten down, instead of giving up, tearing her way back up the mountain in one long, uninterrupted level that combines the themes and ideas of every single stage in the game so far to emphasize her growth. She may have lost physical progress, but this moment serves to highlight the immense amount of mental progress she's made over the course of the game, and that makes her decision to simply start again from the bottom enough, regardless of if she ever actually makes it to the summit. That, I imagine, is why actually reaching the top of the mountain feels strangely anticlimactic. That was never Madeline's actual goal, and so what should have been the climax became the resolution. I can recognize and appreciate the genius that went into tying every facet of the experience together like this and subverting players' expectations in a way that really enhances the experience rather than detracting from it. I even threw the game on my favorites list after finishing it because of how genius I felt it was. And then I took it off that list like a few days later. For some reason, this game didn't work as well for me as I feel like it should have. Describing it here, it sounds like something truly special, and maybe it is, but just not to me. I found that I wasn't that upset when I wrapped up playing the game like I usually am after finishing one of my favorite games for the first time, and the time since, I haven't really thought about it beyond that was really fun. There's nothing wrong with a game just being really fun, but the game has been built up for so long in my mind that it fell into a similar trap that Ocarina of Time did, where it became this mystical idea that transcended itself, and the mystery of what made the game so good ended up being more compelling than the game itself. I really hate that because going into a game with the hope that it'll be one of the best I've ever played is never fair and often makes it harder for me to find any enjoyment in it. I'm playing through Kingdom Hearts 2 for the first time at the moment, and I'm trying to force myself to take it for what it is rather than letting years of hype I've seen for it inflate my expectations beyond a reasonable threshold. Too often I spoil my first experiences with great games because I don't know what to expect, and so the potential for what it could be eclipses what it actually is. So I'm trying to let Celeste be a lesson to myself to approach games with a more relaxed mentality, to not expect anything to be a new favorite, but to instead just soak in the art and see how it makes me feel. I'll likely revisit Celeste at some point in the future. It was really fun after all, and I hope that revisiting it without those lofty expectations will make it easier to take solace in my like of the game instead of needing to love it. Yeah, you knew he was going to show up eventually. Sonic Rush was one of the last significant platformer titles I had yet to play, and that was solely because I was waiting to get my hands on a physical copy instead of emulating, because I really hate emulating DS games. I finally did just that in May, and started playing immediately. I have to replay all the Dimp's Sonic games, but I'm relatively confident in saying that Rush is the best of the bunch. This game has the sauce, bro. Everything from the zone title cards to the UI is just dripping with style, and that's to say nothing of the music, which is so good I was listening to it long before I ever touched the game. I often forget that this game was the one that introduced the boost formula because it feels like Dimps just nailed it first try. Hell, there are things they got right here that even Sonic Team never did. Like, I love the trick system. Sonic games are becoming increasingly dense with automated sequences, so giving the player something to do during those segments and adding a little risk-reward factor by making you perform finishers to end a combo chain and earn the most points is just the perfect touch to elevate the gameplay. Rush brought me back to my first time playing Unleashed. It has the same signature intensity to its stages without being quite as punishing. Getting some of these S ranks felt euphoric. You really have to know exactly when to trick, when to jump, when to boost, when to use a finisher, and at any moment a run could just go to shit because of some dumbassery. But it was never discouraging because I always knew Sonic was having the time of his life screaming his little compressed DS heart out. Really, the only speed bumps in Sonic Rush were the boss fights, which were rough. If the stages were bringing me back to Sonic Unleashed, then the boss fights were bringing me back to Sonic Superstars. They're slow, they're filled with boring forced waiting, and they have annoyingly strict S-rank requirements. I spent actual hours trying to S-rank the final boss, and then I had to do it again because you need to play the game as Sonic and Blaze to unlock the true ending. Real pain in the ass, especially because they're the only things keeping me from running through the game again, as otherwise everything else was fantastic. I'm kinda happy I saved Rush until after Sonic Superstars came out, because it was a nice palate cleanser after the aggressive mediocrity of that game. I'm really hoping Sega ports this game and its sequel to modern platforms at some point, because it is criminally overlooked. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is one of my favorite games of all time, and I thought it was dead. It represented almost everything I love in Mario games, in video games, and it also represented everything the Paper Mario franchise had abandoned in 2012 with Sticker Star, and continues to move away from with each entry. I thought that even acknowledging the existence of this game was forbidden at Nintendo, because it would remind everyone what Paper Mario used to be, before arbitrary limitations and forced innovation stripped the series of its identity. And I don't enjoy harping on about how bad the new Paper Mario games are. I even kinda liked both Color Splash and Origami King. But something was missing from both of them, and I didn't think that something was ever coming back. So imagine my surprise when the September 2023 Nintendo Direct closed with this. In May of 2024, I played the Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door remake, and I loved it. I could gush for hours about how much justice Intelligent Systems did this game. It feels like they've been waiting forever to get a crack at reimagining Thousand-Year Door for a modern audience, and so they went all out when finally given the opportunity. This is a game I love more than anything else for its world. Rogueport and its surrounding areas are dripping with atmosphere, characterized by an unspoken history, and defined by a sense of place in a way that few other Mario games have dared to attempt. Every step of your journey familiarizes you with new sights, introduces you to memorable characters, and places you in unique scenarios unlike anything in a Mario game. It is so amazing, then, that the remake does everything in its power to enhance the impact this world leaves on you. The level of visual detail has doubled since the original. Not only does the world have the more lifelike, papery look of the modern Paper Mario entries, the characters have been given a facelift, decked out with dozens of new animations and expressions that bring their personalities to the forefront. The English script for the game has been completely rewritten, restoring character-building dialogue that was lost in translation in the original release. The soundtrack has been massively overhauled and expanded, with most tracks seeing extensions that further inform the mood of every area or battle. New compositions have been added alongside a slew of rearrangements of existing tracks that serve to not only add variety to the experience, but also to make each part of the adventure feel distinct. These are not superfluous additions. They helped to further my connection with the game's world, its characters, its story. There's this prevailing sentiment surrounding remakes that they lack artistic merit when only altering the visual or audio components of the experience rather than the interactive ones, but the things that differentiate video games from regular old games are those visual and audio components. They are just as important in establishing a relationship between the player and the game, and so anything done to strengthen them is also done in service of strengthening that relationship. I can't tell you how hard I was grinning listening to the unique arrangements of the battle theme for each chapter. It gave each segment so much character. Getting to Riverside Station in Chapter 6 and hearing that jazz rendition of the battle music might have been one of the video game related highlights of my year. I remember just sitting the controller down and listening for a bit with a big stupid smile on my face. I could say the same about every single boss track. The Chapter 3 end boss, which I will not spoil, always had one of my favorite battle themes in any Mario game, and the new remix of it is fucking legendary. I swear every half hour this remake showed me some delightful new change, whether that be a fast travel pipe that drastically improves the pace of the game's slowest chapter, or an entirely new super boss based on a recurring joke character in the series. This feels like a remake made by people who loved the original just as much as I did, and in a way I feel like they've outdone even that game. This is, to me, the definitive version of Thousand Year Door, and I can't believe I'm saying that. Paper Mario and Mario RPGs as a whole mean so much to me, and for a time it felt like they were just dead. To be hit with this remake only half a year after Super Mario RPG got a similar glow-up feels genuinely surreal. I felt like a kid again playing Thousand Year Door on Switch, and I was even a bit depressed finishing the game and having nothing left to do, which rarely ever happens to me. This was hands down my favorite video game experience of 2024, even if I've technically already played the original game. I just had to talk about it for a bit here because I don't know if I'll ever have another opportunity to gush about a new Paper Mario game. This was my first WarioWare game. I don't think I'm a WarioWare fan. Don't get me wrong, it was good fun. The inherently unserious nature of WarioWare's world and characters is entertaining, and I quite enjoyed how the microgames were sorted into little goofy vignettes featuring characters from the WarioWare universe. Motion controls were naturally a great fit for this kind of game, and I have a feeling this is the concept the team was probably able to get the most mileage out of when it came to brainstorming concepts for new microgames, as evidenced by the existence of WarioWare Move-It. I had a lot of fun posing with the Wiimote in increasingly absurd positions at the request of the very bored man.
The remote control. Hold the 4 batons straight, with the tip pointing forward.
But that's really all I have to say about the experience. I blasted through the story mode in a little under 2 hours in early June and have felt no desire to return to this game or the series in the months since. Games this deliberately shallow don't really do much for me. I've always been primarily about meaty single-player experiences, and while WarioWare is fun for what it is, I can't see myself checking out any more of it when Nintendo refuses to charge anything less than 50 bones for these glorified minigame collections. Being as big of a fan as I am of the Paper Mario games, it's a little wild that it's taken me this long to really explore Mario's other major RPG sub-series. The only Mario & Luigi game I had finished prior to 2024 was Paper Jam, which I exclusively picked up because Paper Mario was in it. Actually, Paper Jam is probably the reason why I never touched another one of these games. Coming off the high of the Thousand Year Door remake in early June, however, I was craving a fresh Mario RPG experience, and Superstar Saga was sitting right there on Nintendo Switch Online. Sure enough, it was a funny, simple, straightforward Mario RPG with creative characters and catchy music, exactly how Ma used to make them. I was struggling to really come up with much to say about Superstar Saga. I engaged with it in a very pure way, just booting it up and playing an hour or two every few days whenever I was in the mood, rather than blocking out long chunks of time for me to really sit down and immerse myself in it. Usually I'm hesitant to even start playing a game if I don't think I'll have a sufficient amount of time to devote to it, but abandoning that temporarily with Superstar Saga was really liberating. It suited the similarly carefree nature of the game, which whisked me from one thing to the next with the giddiness of a child showing you their favorite toys. The combat was almost a little too simple, which I feel is a problem with the original Paper Mario as well, albeit less so. There are less moves at your disposal, and the ones you do have aren't often meaningfully differentiated from each other in utility. This could have been a real problem if the game wasn't so snappy. This is a tightly packed 12-hour experience with virtually no fat aside from a very brief fetch quest in the late game, so the simplicity ultimately serves the game more than it detracts from it, allowing for that hop in and play for 30 minutes appeal. It was also just so nice playing a Mario game with good writing and characters again. Popple and Fawful and Prince Peasley all quickly grew to become some of my favorite Mario RPG characters out there with how charming their personalities were. Fawful in particular has so many bizarre witticisms that I became kind of envious of the writers. I wish I could write a character with half as many hilarious lines as he has. You bet I was even more eager to play Bowser's Inside Story knowing he was the main villain of that game. What's funny about my decision to play Superstar Saga was that it happened a week before the June Direct where Mario & Luigi Brothership was announced. I didn't even know we'd be getting a new entry, but having the announcement occur right in the middle of my playthrough bolstered my motivation to play more of the series, something I'd like to continue to do into 2025. This game kind of felt the same as Celeste for me, only worse. I played it about a month after it came out, sometime in late June, and while the astounding sound and level design pulled me in whenever I was playing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from the experience. It doesn't help that the game was being praised as one of the greatest Metroidvanias ever made for weeks following its launch, which only helped set expectations unreasonably high, but even then, I didn't go into Animal Well expecting too much. I suppose it was the very tantalizing idea that this game was hiding some mind-blowing secrets around every corner, when in actuality much of what I discovered ranged from totally unexciting to nothing more than a nice atmospheric touch that really soured my enjoyment of the game. With other games that center primarily around discovery, like, say, Breath of the Wild, the core gameplay is enough to offer something for even those who have discovered everything about it to enjoy. With Animal Well, I just don't find myself drawn back to the very simple core gameplay. The game's world was compelling for one go-around, but I can't muster up any excitement or affection for it like I can with any of my other favorite video game worlds, and I hardly feel like revisiting it now that I've seen much of what it has to offer. It's a shame because I do think Animal Well is a very good game, and I could absolutely see the right person loving it, but it really didn't do anything for me, and it's already starting to fade from memory. If anything, I'm just happy Billy Basso, the talented developer behind this game, is receiving his flowers. It's genuinely heartwarming whenever an unassuming indie game takes off like this and its creator is given the opportunity to continue creating because of the financial success of their work. I can only hope I can see something similar to what everyone else sees in Animal Well in whatever he makes next. No More Heroes was my favorite game that I played for the first time in 2023, and Pikmin 4 released that year. It completely blindsided me, wrapping a thought-provoking narrative about detachment and escapism in a stylish and over-the-top package. I think about the ending to that game all the time. It's seriously become one of my favorite finales in any game. As such, I was desperate to dive into No More Heroes 2, Desperate Struggle, though I held off till July to give myself some time to properly digest each entry and enjoy them at a reasonable pace. So, did the sequel live up to the first game after 7 months of anticipation? Not at all, and I fucking loved it. No More Heroes 2 is a much more fun game than No More Heroes, with a lot less to say than No More Heroes. All the grindy, tedious, odd jobs you had to complete from the first game are replaced with actually fun arcade-style minigames, which are only necessary if you want to upgrade Travis, as ranking fights no longer have an entrance fee. The story is even less grounded than the original, devolving into utter chaos as Travis contends with space stations, transformers made of cheerleaders, and pop stars for the top spot. The game wastes pretty much no time giving players the middle finger and telling them that it isn't interested in tying up any of the loose ends from the end of the first game, instead delivering a hammy story about revenge. And while it could be argued that this makes No More Heroes 2 a more shallow, less artistically brazen experience than the first game, and while I would even agree to an extent, it really is just so much fun. For starters, the soundtrack is the soundtrack to No More Heroes 2. Never before has there been a more stacked lineup of tracks in a game's OST, but what's truly astounding is how varied it is, both in terms of genre and effect. Half the time I was playing this game, I was smiling and humming along to the music. The absurdity of the ranking fights this go-around feels like a natural step up from the first game, which already delighted in its goofy assassins with their goofy powers, and somehow they managed to weave the insanity of these fights into a well-written story with a fantastic character arc for Travis. Travis is a much more traditional character this go around, with a much more straightforward hero's journey, but he has his own spin on it that feels simultaneously like it leans into the cliches of the trope, while also avoiding that corny predictability when it matters most. His crash out on Sylvia after the number 2 ranking fight is one of my favorite moments in the entire game, and solidified him as one of my favorite characters ever. I love how he forgoes the typical killing is wrong charade, and instead tries to articulate how killing should have meaning, and how the UAA has revoked that meaning and turned people's lives into a grim statistic. It does a great job demonstrating how he's still a deeply flawed person with a distorted worldview, while working so well as a moment of surprising growth for his character. The ending this go around is not anywhere near as flawless as that of the first game, but I kinda love that about it. This is a messy game with incredibly polished combat, amazing music, a mixed bag of boss fights, strange pacing, and a really shitty hour-long stretch with Shinobu, so it checks out for the ending to be just as sloppy as the game itself. Just like the first game though, I've grown to appreciate how the developers deprived the player of satisfaction and instead chose to leave the game on a pensive note. No More Heroes is quickly climbing the ranks as one of my favorite game series ever for shit like this, and I cannot wait to finish up the series this year with Travis Strikes Again and No More Heroes 3. Maybe I'll even check out more of Suda51's work. He's one of the most overlooked creatives in the industry right now, and I am totally on board with his insane creative vision. I couldn't find an affordable copy of Partners in Time after finishing Superstar Saga, so Bowser's Inside Story was next in early August. I played about a third of the way through this one over a decade ago, and I remember liking it well enough, but not really having any strong opinions on it either way. That's changed. This game rocks. Bowser is one of the best characters. Yeah. He has been a highlight in almost every Mario RPG, and giving him his own spot as basically the main character of one of them was a stroke of genius from Alpha Dream. This is the best writing he has ever had as a character in any Mario-related piece of media. He perfectly strikes that balance of being just a big dumbass, but also packing insane amounts of aura, and managing to be legitimately intimidating at times. I love how he doesn't have some corny arc where he learns to be a good guy late in the game. He's just a selfish asshole the whole way through, whose goals just happen to align with Mario and Luigi's, and he's stupid enough that he gets tricked into helping them the whole game. His speech right before the final boss, where he applauds the scenery summoned by the Dark Star and then tells it that the Mushroom Kingdom is his to conquer, is so raw. I was smiling so hard watching it. There was a clear evolution in the combat of these games between Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story 2. There's more customization involved, 2 distinct playstyles to master between the Bros and Bowser, and way more special moves with unique minigames to accompany them. Some of these are so wonderfully over the top, like cleaning a giant block dog so that he and his 10 block children can ram into an enemy, or making Luigi really fat by force-feeding him candy and then throwing him on top of a boss. Not only are these funnier, but there's way more variation in how you perform them that it feels like there's 3 times as much learning involved here as there was in Superstar Saga. I loved my time with this game. I played it in short bursts just like Superstar Saga, and every single play session was characterized by some goofy hijinks. It felt like I was tuning into an episode of a really good Mario cartoon, which I realize is the appeal of these games. I always made the mistake comparing Mario and Luigi to Paper Mario, which feels like a grand adventure series with big dramatic moments. Bowser's Inside Story shows me that Mario & Luigi is much more about the moment-to-moment joy of wacky characters and stupid predicaments, and that joy is so much fun to experience. I played this over the summer with my friends, and it was actually some of the most fun I had all year, not even just with a video game. I've always wanted to play more Mario Party than I do, because this series is endlessly hilarious and there's so many Mario Party games to choose from, but it can be a hassle getting 3 people together and sitting down for an hour-long match with them. As such, I've only really played through Mario Party 1, 2, 8, 10, Super, and Superstars. Luckily, my friend group was on board with the idea of playing through more of these games together, so we were able to get through every board in 3 by the end of August, and in that time, Mario Party 3 may have taken 2's spot as my favorite in the series. 3 items is an actual game changer. Not being stuck with a skeleton key for 10 turns while your dickhead friend buys his 3rd golden lamp is revolutionary, and being able to hold more items also means the team had to create more items, which means higher strategy. There were some next level, turbo genius plays happening in this game, and also mostly dumbass ones. It was never not funny watching someone run the calculations on some insane plan with a specific item for like 5 turns and then just totally fuck up the execution because they're stupid. Speaking of stupid, this game has gambling. Literally every time one of my friends would land on the gambling space, he would win the first round and then wager all of his money again and lose it all. So Game Guy is one of the best mechanics in any Mario Party and must return in the next game. Aside from that, this is classic Mario Party. I love the minigames, I love the boards, I love the pop-up book aesthetic, I even love the Donkey Kong head I got on the main menu for doing the entire boring story mode. That's all I gotta say about that, moving on. Fuck, I hate it! I'm trying to get into Kingdom Hearts more. 4 is on the way and will likely be here before you know it in 2033, so I have some catching up to do, as I'd only ever played the first game in 2021. I thought it was okay when I first beat it, nothing too special, but I replayed it on a whim in early 2024 and... I'm locked in, baby. That shit was so good it made me a Kingdom Hearts fan for life. Hell, it was so good that in mid-September I suffered through all 25 hours of this nightmare. Card combat is very good for poker. It is not so good for a 3D action game where I have to dodge rapid-fire attacks and counterattack during very limited windows of opportunity while also shuffling through a deck in the corner of the screen. There is way too much shit going on in an action RPG to be doing all that, so why not just spam? Because you can, in every enemy encounter in the game. The slight mechanic where you stack 3 cards together to perform a super attack is supposed to be balanced because you lose the first card in a slight when you use one, but these encounters never last long enough for this to become actually punishing, and the combat is otherwise so taxing and there are so many enemies in this game that it only benefits you to spam to get through all of it faster. It doesn't help that the game has you revisiting every single world from the original Kingdom Hearts, with the same music, the same enemies, the same characters, the same bosses, and slight variations of the same storylines, which were already just slight variations of the storylines to classic Disney movies. I watched every Disney animated movie last year with my sister, and there's only so many times a guy can experience the story of Aladdin in a year before he wants to kill Iago with a shotgun. I suppose a Keyblade will do, though. The actual story to this game is some dumb shit too. Axel is the only good character, but he only shows up sometimes, so you're left watching cryptic nobodies spout nonsense for 10 hours and not explain to you what's happening, while Sora slowly loses all his memories like they told him would happen at the beginning of the game. Then everyone dies, except for Axel, thank God, and Sora forgets all of it at the end anyway. I was already beyond done with this game after grinding the hardest shit final boss for over an hour, and then I went to the title screen and Nomura said, okay, now play it again. And no one can call me a fake gamer again because I did. I played the Riku story too and learned all about light and darkness and Mickey Mouse, and you know what? It was terrible. This is one of the most miserable games ever made, and I'm so ready for Kingdom Hearts 2. I played this when it was released in late September. I don't want to spend too long on Echoes of Wisdom, even though I probably will, because modern Zelda discourse has become tiring. It simply isn't fun arguing about these games because both sides are insistent on a very specific way forward for the series and offer the most reductive dismissals for very valid points. I personally really enjoyed Breath of the Wild. I loved how malleable it felt, how Discovery felt like it was built into the gameplay and not just the exploration. The game was mechanically rich, but that was born from a desire to make the player feel as though they were surviving in the wilderness, adapting to trying circumstances with whatever they had. The emphasis wasn't solely on creative, wacky solutions to problems. Oftentimes you would simply solve things the intended, straightforward way. But those rare moments where I was backed against a wall and that pressure allowed me to conceive a really creative solution were made all the more satisfying because they were uncommon. Survival is sometimes about adaptability, but often about reliability, and I felt Breath of the Wild struck the right balance in order to convey that feeling of braving a harsh world. Tears of the Kingdom and now Echoes of Wisdom both feel as though they abandoned that sensibility in favor of a more simple approach, creative solutions to everything. You are meant to break the game often, and this is to encourage experimentation and a varied playstyle. Ironically, because of how many creative tools you have at your disposal in both of these entries, I felt they achieved the opposite result. Games where I discovered overpowered techniques very early on and then coasted through the rest of the experience. The friction that provides a Zelda game with that adventurous feeling is completely absent, as almost everything can be thoughtlessly cheesed. By honing in on what made Breath of the Wild special, those moments of free-form experimentation, that one component became significantly less special, and with nothing left to lean on, both Tears of the Kingdom and Echoes of Wisdom mostly fall apart into middling experiences with clunky menu navigation, poor performance, lackluster storytelling, and the same tired tropes we've seen in every Zelda game for the last almost 4 decades. I know I'm talking about Tears of the Kingdom just as much as Echoes of Wisdom here, but that's because these games are indistinguishable in quality for me. They fall into the exact same pitfalls and became a frustrating soup of disappointment. I don't agree that open-air Zelda can't work or isn't the right direction for the franchise, I just don't like the design philosophy these last 2 games have adopted. The echo mechanic is somehow even more cumbersome than the building of Tears of the Kingdom because it's almost always necessary to progress, which made this game even less enjoyable, as almost any minor inconvenience was blown into an annoying stopgap that took more effort than it should have to circumvent. I just can't find the fun in this type of game where every challenge is simultaneously very annoying and yet almost completely brain dead. Because even if I want to avoid taking the easy way out, I'm then forced to engage with that annoyance even further. I had a bad feeling about Echoes of Wisdom shortly after it was revealed. It had Tears of the Kingdom's fingerprints all over it. Sure enough, I wasn't a huge fan. I hope open-air Zelda can regain its footing with the next entry, because my interest in this franchise I used to adore is waning with each new installment. October was the perfect time for more Castlevania. I was admittedly unenthused to dive into Simon's Quest, knowing that it was one of those NES games. You know, the bad kind. Another late 80s game stuffed with cryptic nonsense that only existed so that you'd have to shell out extra money on a Nintendo Power magazine. What I wasn't prepared for, though, was that even putting all of that stuff aside, Castlevania II still sucks. The variety of Castlevania 1 is gone, replaced with the same boring copy-paste forests and castles for the whole runtime. Integral upgrades are locked behind ludicrously high heart requirements, a currency that resets every time you die, a lovely mechanic for an infamously difficult franchise. Bosses are practically non-existent and hardly put up a fight when they do show up, with the final Dracula encounter being one of the most pathetic final fights in any game. Castles are loaded with fake floors that drop you to lower levels and force you to redo long stretches of gameplay. This whole game just feels designed to piss people off, and it sure did the trick for me. I'm typically very resilient when it comes to video games, but I finally cracked playing this. I never used to save state in games, but I was spamming them here. I played this purely to get through it and say I had done it, and I'm not ashamed at all. I was not about to spend 10 minutes grinding to get all my hearts back every single time I died. I also had a guide on hand for the whole playthrough, and even with those 2 conveniences, Simon's Quest was zero fun. It honestly felt like an alternate universe version of Castlevania made by a completely different team than the original, which is why it's so bizarre that this was directed by the same guy as the first game. I really did not fuck with this game, and was crossing my fingers that Castlevania 3 would bring things back to basics. It has been 13 years since Sonic Team put out a game I enjoyed. I'm just gonna cut the bullshit rambling, I had lost hope. Lost World, Forces, and Frontiers all felt like they took ages to come out, with drip feed reveals that spawned unbearable fandom discourse leading to underwhelming releases that represented almost nothing about what I grew to love about Sonic. Time and time again, the folks at Sonic Team would assure everyone that they were finally on the right track this time, that those other bad games were bad, and this next one was going to be good, only for something just as hopelessly mediocre to be spat out. Didn't help that after the masterwork that was Sonic Mania, Sega and Takashi Iizuka contracted Arzest, a dev team with an infamous track record, to develop the next 2D Sonic entry, rushed it out early, and then proceeded to scratch their heads when their $60 3-hour classic Sonic romp that looked like it was ripped straight off the App Store that dropped the same week as a new 2D Mario didn't end up selling that well. and with each release, Sonic fans lined up to defend the mediocrity they paid full price for. It was a step in the right direction. It wasn't Sonic Team's fault, Sega rushed the game out. Well, actually, the Sonic game you like wasn't even that good to begin with, so you need to stop disliking the new one. By the time Sonic X Shadow Generations was revealed, I was mentally checked out. It was exhausting, and I was pretty certain this series would never deliver something that resonated with me ever again. Everyone else seemed to be content with what Sonic is, so maybe I really am just unable to accept change. Maybe I really did trick myself into liking the older titles. Maybe Sonic just isn't for me anymore.
I'm sorry I put you on this path, Shadow, but I'm proud of how you have walked it. I believe in you, son.
Shadow!
It's all right, Maria. I'm letting go of that destructive anger. But I will continue to fight. Fight with your wish in my heart. Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
I love Shadow Generations. It is almost everything I could have wanted from a new Sonic release, and I can't believe I'm saying those words right now. I had to force myself to quell my excitement for it prior to its release, even though every trailer just made the game look more promising than the last, because I told myself that there was no way this game could be good, could live up to my adoration of the series from Sonic 1 all the way through to Sonic Generations. And yet, my experience playing Shadow Gens for the first time in late October was characterized by childlike glee that I haven't felt with a game in who knows how long. I was obsessively replaying stages, laughing at my own fuck-ups, and freaking out whenever I nailed a risky skip. I listened to the soundtrack the night the game dropped and was losing my mind at how hard the new versions of Sunset Heights and What I'm Made Of went. I sunk over 40 hours into this game in just the last 2 months of the year, and I already know I'm going to come back for so much more in the coming years. I don't even want to delve into specifics because I know I'd be rambling for hours, and if I make it through the rest of the Sonic games, I am absolutely going to make a dedicated video gushing about how good this game is. It is my game of the year, not necessarily because it's my favorite game that was released in 2024, although it very well may be, but because it means so much to me watching a series I love that has fallen so far from grace claw its way back into my heart. I can't tell you how amazing it felt finally getting to watch Shadow tell Maria that he's been fighting with her promise in his heart all this time, and that he's going to continue to do so, completing a character arc spanning 5 games. After all the confusion and anguish of his past, seeing him become a genuine hero by 06 felt so immensely satisfying. Now, having Maria, the one who inspired him to do good in the first place, be there to validate his growth over the course of all these games at the end of that actualization made me more emotional than any moment in a Sonic game since, Sonic Unleashed? That moment alone was enough to solidify this as one of my favorite video game experiences of the last year, right alongside the remake of The Thousand Year Door for how much both meant to me. I sat there with my jaw on the floor when the credits rolled, still reeling from that final cutscene, actually overcome with happiness about actually getting a new Sonic game that I unequivocally cherish. That feeling will stick with me for years. Shadow Generations is an amazing game stapled onto what was already one of my favorite games, and I have more hope than ever that Sonic Team will continue to learn and grow from their mistakes and produce games that hoist this series back up to the top of the list of my favorite video game franchises. For the time being though, I'm simply content to have gotten something this good. feels really good to say that Mario Party is officially back. I was hesitant to after Superstars, which was one of the best Mario Party games we've ever gotten, but it also consisted entirely of retooled older content. I wasn't fully convinced that ND Cube would be able to create a great new Mario Party with the lessons they had learned from making Superstars, or that they'd even try to take Mario Party back in that direction in the first place. Maybe it was obvious that they would. I mean, Super Mario Party is the best-selling game they've made, and that game veered closer to the Hudson Mario Party games than any of their other entries, but I was still so relieved seeing Super Mario Party Jamboree's reveal and realizing that we'd finally be getting another fully original classic-style Mario Party game. After playing through the game in October and November, I can now verify that that is exactly what Jamboree is. Jamboree is kind of an ideal follow-up to the two other Switch Mario Party games, reworking the promising components of Super Mario Party, like its expansive array of side modes and its ally system, and combining that with the more conventional board and item design of Superstars. And it's those boards and items that elevate Jamboree. 7 is a pretty substantial number of boards to work through, and they got the ratio of new to old perfect with a 5-to-2 split. Rainbow Castle and Western Land were my favorite boards from their respective Mario Party games, so it was a delight to see them back, especially the latter. I am particularly susceptible to Mario Party 2 nostalgia, and I think a third of my time with that game was spent on Western Land. The new boards, though, are the real highlights, which is almost unbelievable considering how bland and poorly thought out Super's boards were. Every board has enough unique events and NPCs to give it a real place in the Mario universe, and all of them vary enough in design to offer a compelling experience in their own right. Rainbow Galleria and King Bowser's Keep are two of my new favorite boards in the series. They're expertly laid out to offer a rich variety of choices, and their main mechanics blend strategy and luck to create a suitably chaotic experience. I'm also overjoyed that we finally have a new Mario Party with a fuck ton of items. The selection in Superstars was already super solid, but it feels like the item count has been doubled, which injects even more tactical variety into any given match. Special shout out to the return of trap spaces. These have always been a great idea, and I have no idea why they've been absent for so long. Nothing beats loading up a long straightaway with star steel spaces and then watching your friends squirm as they close in on them. The minigames here were a bit of a mixed bag, unfortunately. So many are locked behind motion, and I don't care how hard Nintendo wants me to use them, I'm not bringing my Joy-Cons out for anything other than Tetris 99. Without them, the selection isn't necessarily small, but it is at a size where most, if not all of them, should be of a certain quality for that selection to be considered good, and I think more than a few miss the mark. Aimlessly wandering around a planet to collect flags or getting soft-locked instantly in a 1v3 aren't really my idea of fun, and it's a bit surprising that some of them are so lackluster when ironically the one thing ND Cube usually gets right is their minigames. Still, there are more than enough hits here to make up for the misses, and frankly I'd rather the minigames be a bit mixed than the boards. My only problem with Jamboree is that I feel like I hardly got to play it last year. I'm probably coming across as less passionate about it than Mario Party 3, and that's because I only really got to play a few rounds with my friends since they were away at college when the game dropped. I've been itching to play more since I've been waiting for what feels like an eternity for a Mario Party game like this, but I'm also okay with waiting a little longer to fully sink my teeth into it now that I've been assured that ND Cube has found their footing and is capable of pumping out banger Mario Party games. After 9 years, Mario & Luigi is finally back, closing out what seems to be a year-long effort from Nintendo to revive Mario RPGs. I feel bad for Mario & Luigi fans for having to wait that long for a new game, especially with the last one being Paper Jam, but I feel even worse that the result of all that waiting was a pretty middling game. I wanted so badly to love Mario & Luigi Brothership when I played it in November. Playing through Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story earlier in this year helped me to develop a real fondness for the franchise, and while Alpha Dream not being involved with the project was a concern for many, I've seen Nintendo franchises change hands so many times and continue to produce masterpiece games that I wasn't too worried. All the promotional material made the game look super good, from the insanely expressive animations to all the new characters, so I was confident I'd have a good time with it. And, well, I kinda did. I mean, the game certainly wasn't bad. I even quite enjoyed the first few hours despite how slow they were. They gave me a strong feeling that the game was working up to something amazing, with the cast of characters slowly expanding and tidbits of lore and world building being sprinkled in. The early game islands were dull thematically, but I was confident that was because the game was saving all the cool shit for later on. Then I kept playing. For all the talk I heard about how the game gets good the further in you are, I couldn't shake a feeling of growing disappointment the more I played. I slowly realized the game's drip-feed approach to storytelling and character development wasn't in service of a series of grand payoffs that occur in the second half of the game. It was simply a case of the writers and developers stretching out some very shallow story beats and character arcs to fit a 40-hour runtime. Character moments are often cliché and follow-up conversations filled with pointless dialogue and charmless humor. Big story revelations are so obvious that I genuinely thought the developers were attempting to trick me, only to be consistently disappointed when that very obvious thing that was going to happen actually did happen and was played totally straight. The villain troupe is painfully underdeveloped despite having so much potential, with some of the best designs and personalities in the series, and the main villain's motivations are very underwhelming when they're finally unveiled. Doesn't matter though, because the game swaps that villain out in the last 5 hours for an even more underdeveloped villain with a laughably easy, if somewhat climactic, final fight. All the time I spent investing myself in the characters and world felt disrespected as I was dragged from one uninteresting locale to another every 2 to 3 hours to do some mindless busy work. The game is all about forming connections with other people, but with writing that is so often charmless and meandering, I really struggled to connect with anyone or anything that was happening, something that was effortless for me in most other Mario RPGs. I wish that was the extent of my problems, but there's still more. I remarked earlier how the other Mario and Luigi games could at times have somewhat simplistic combat, but the strong pacing of the games ensured that your toolkit was always growing at a rate fast enough to keep them engaging. Those games were 15 hours, and Brothership took me almost 50 to beat. The combat in these games is not interesting enough to sustain that long of a runtime, even with the new battle plug system that lets you heavily customize your approach to battling. If anything, the plugs make the combat even more cumbersome, because when you're not doing Rose attacks that take over a minute to execute, you're swapping out the plugs every other turn, either because they ran out of charges or because an enemy showed up that requires a different strategy to take down most efficiently. Unlocking my 5th plug slot toward the end of the game should have gotten my mind racing at all the possible plug combinations I now have access to, but instead I was immediately filled with dread at the thought of having to constantly swap out 5 different battle plugs. What's worse is that this game is filled with mindless side quests with often terrible rewards, but they're also the only way to experience the extent of this game's character writing, which I wanted to do because I wanted to love the characters so badly, so I did most of them. Not only was this painfully boring, but couple all the extra enemy battling I was doing during them with the battle plug system, and I was so overpowered that I think I only got 1 or 2 game overs during my entire playthrough. Of course, I didn't fully mind this, because the game reuses the same enemy types ad nauseum that being underleveled would have just meant taking more time to fight them, which also would have meant sitting through consecutive attacks that can last half a minute each. There were elements I enjoyed of the experience. I grew to like certain characters like Connie, Snatlet, and the Extension Core. I think the music and the art direction were generally pretty good across the board. The bosses were some of the best in any Mario game and actually provided a sufficient challenge, despite how disappointingly infrequent they were, and there's probably more I could list. But none of that changes how burned I felt by the game, and I wasn't even a massive Mario and Luigi fan. I can only imagine how they felt waiting almost a decade and then getting something so disappointing despite its vast potential. And that's what stings the most, that within Brothership exists a better game that's trying to claw its way out. So many promising ideas are suffocated by the game's bloat and made to be lesser, and I can only feel frustrated playing another game released by a major AAA publisher too long for its own good. Sometimes 20 hours is more than enough, and in this case probably would have made the Mario & Luigi series way more fans. I don't think Acquire, the developers of Brothership, should be taken off the series. I just want their next game to get to the point faster, both in gameplay and in writing, and deliver something much bolder than what we got, because as is, I think I'll just stick to the older games. My free time diminished slightly in November because I was occupied with actually being employed, so the only game I was able to finish that month was Mario & Luigi Brothership. Because of that, I wanted to use the last month of the year to beef up this list by playing a bunch of shorter NES/Game Boy era games that I've been putting off for a long time. I'm not really a big fan of this era of video games, and this script is currently almost 15,000 words long, so I'm going to try and blast through these next 7 or so games, all of which I played in December, starting with Castlevania II, Belmont's Revenge. I I dove back into Castlevania one last time to play 3 more games from the series. First up is the sequel to Castlevania The Adventure, Belmont's Revenge. Now even just the thought of that is enough to send shivers down my spine, but funnily enough this game isn't half bad. Honestly, I think it's better than the actual Castlevania 2 on NES. First, we gotta talk about the soundtrack. Holy shit, this is the best music on the Game Boy, hands down. Back-to-back bangers in every single level, and I don't even like Game Boy music like that, so you know it's fire. I was humming every one of these while playing. Then the art direction has seen a significant upgrade, with ultra-detailed sprite work for Game Boy standards, making this one of the best looking games on the platform. Christopher is still slow, but his speed has seen an increase and his mid-air control is so much better, and that combined with a steep decrease in do-or-die platforming makes this game so much more fun to play. Sub-weapons are back too, even if there's less of them than usual, making the gameplay more dynamic. The game also employs an open-ended progression system, a first for the series, allowing a level of choice in which of the major areas you want to tackle first, and the stages themselves are very fun. Hell, even the checkpoints are generously placed. The only knock against the game I have is that it just isn't that memorable or special of an experience, but that's alright. Sometimes it's fine for a game to just be a quick burst of fun and nothing more. I'd be way more likely to come back to this than any other Castlevania I played last year other than Castlevania IV. Good shit. Now Castlevania III Dracula's Curse is bad shit. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't like this one. It's basically a less fun version of Castlevania 1, with many of the same level themes, only longer and way more frustrating. The clunky ass controls of the NES games really bit me in the ass here. There are so many sequences where enemies are placed in the most inconvenient locations and just knock you 50 feet down a cliff into a hole. I've heard the US version of this game is much more difficult, so maybe these moments don't exist in the Japanese release, but man, there are some awful bits of design here that punish first-timers hard. I know Castlevania is about pattern recognition, but I don't think that justifies beginners' traps, especially in a game where enemies deal a quarter of your health bar in damage in the final few stages, which can run for upwards of 9 minutes. If the game was at least interesting, I could maybe recommend this to other people, but it really isn't. It tries to have this choose-your-own-adventure style to it, but all that amounts to is some slight variations in the levels you go to during a playthrough, meaning you have to play the game 3 times to experience all of them, and the ability to play as a companion character of your choice. I mean, it's not really your choice because the devs didn't do a good job highlighting which stages contain which companions, and you're forced to take a new one with you whenever you meet them, but that doesn't matter anyway because they all kinda suck. They have attacks so pathetic that it often felt like the designers didn't even want me to use them, and while they are situationally useful, both Alucard and Grant spent most of my time with the game just hanging out in Trevor Belmont's pocket. Everything else in the game is just standard Castlevania fare. Even the music was unremarkable, only coming live in 1 or 2 tracks. Yeah, not a fan. This one also sucks. This is the 3rd game in the Game Boy line of Castlevania games, but really it feels like the true sequel to Castlevania The Adventure. Being one of the last games on the console, you'd think it would look even better than Belmont's Revenge, but nah, it arguably looks even worse than The Adventure. The stages feel like they're mostly on autopilot, consisting of long hallways or vertical shafts with nothing but the same enemies spammed repeatedly. They also added funny fake candles. In Castlevania, the one thing you do is hit candles. In Castlevania Legends, if you hit certain candles, you get sent to the dungeon, where all the ghouls live, and have to take a minute to fight 30 enemies with no health refills and no reward at the end. This would be like if getting the mushroom in Mario killed you sometimes. Wait, the difficulty balancing is also terrible. I didn't even know Sonia Belmont could use the Chaos Emeralds to activate her super form for my whole playthrough, but it didn't really matter because the game is easy as shit anyway and only ever presents a challenge during boss fights. This is the most unremarkable Castlevania game, so much so that it was actually stricken from the canon. Wait, it was? Why the fuck did I play this? Alright, that's one half of the Metroidvania forefathers out of the way, so let's cover the other. Metroid is one of my favorite series. Metroid is also my least favorite Metroid game. I'd only ever experienced Metroids 1 and 2 through their respective remakes, Zero Mission and Samus Returns, and after having played through their original counterparts, I can confirm that that is the way to go. Metroid on NES wasn't really a miserable experience like everyone made it out to be, although to be fair, using a guide and the occasional save state will make any game more tolerable, but at the same time, using those features kind of deflates half of the fun of a Metroid game, the exploration and the tension. You're supposed to feel like you're slowly mapping out a hostile alien world, carefully combing over chunks of the map and collecting upgrades until eventually you're a super soldier who has the whole game's layout memorized. I don't really get any of that satisfaction by cheesing my way through the game, but I'll still take a lack of satisfaction over irritation. Planet Zebes wouldn't really be that fun to explore anyway, with so many of the same rooms copy-pasted and secrets being tucked away behind inconspicuous tiles that blend in with the rest of a room. This type of design doesn't reward intuition and observation, it's just there to make the game longer so that kids in the 80s couldn't rent it and beat it in a weekend. This is exactly the kind of shit that puts me off of NES games, and as if the awful world design wasn't enough, the game also decides to respawn you with low health and no missile ammunition whenever you die and forces you to grind to get both back. Ideally, I should feel rewarded for going out of my way to collect upgrades, but in Metroid 1, I was forced to spend more time farming enemies if I wanted to make use of them. I'm so happy this game was remade because it means I can recommend that people start with Metroid 1 without actually starting with Metroid 1. Metroid 2, meanwhile, wasn't all that bad. This is a much more manageable game, with streamlined level design, clever item placement, and more frequent save points and health refills. Everything I could say about it is likely all stuff you've heard before if you're interested in Metroid. And honestly, I don't think I have much to add to the conversation. This is just a good sequel that uses very little to do a lot, with an iconic ending following up a serviceable experience. I liked Samus Returns slightly more, even if it misses the point of the original a little, but that was never one of my favorite Metroid games anyway, so I don't think there's a huge disparity in quality between the two like there is with Metroid 1 and Zero Mission. The game is only like 2 hours, so if you've gone through the remake and never played the original before, I'd say it's worth a shot. Is terrible. For as big of a fan as I am of the 3D Zelda series, I've still yet to play around half of the 2D games. Zelda sits alongside Mario as a franchise where the 3D stuff aligns with my tastes a lot more than the 2D stuff does. After my disappointment with Echoes of Wisdom though, I've been craving a more traditional 2D Zelda experience. I decided it would be wise to knock out Zelda 2 first before hitting some of the more well-received entries. Can't say I enjoyed the experience, but I'm happy it's over with now. I didn't exactly expect to like Zelda 2, but I don't think I expected to dislike it either. Really, I didn't know what to expect from a game talked about as little as this. I dove in with my mind open and my phone's browser open to a walkthrough, because I was not going through more cryptic NES bullshit guideless after my experience with Zelda 1 a few years back. I quickly came to understand that Zelda 2 is one of the most evil games ever created. That cryptic NES bullshit I just mentioned, somebody call the police because this game is fucking overdosing on it. Not only was the game horribly mistranslated, but even if it was faithfully translated, I still don't think I would have figured out half this shit. Castlevania 2 had an infamous part where you gotta take a red orb to a dead end and then crouch and a tornado spins in for some reason. People poke fun at that bit all the time. Zelda 2 has like 5 different moments like that. It's also hard to want to experiment in a game that removes all of your experience and starts you back at level 1 whenever you game over. Oh, and spawns you back where the game starts, just to kick you while you're down. This isn't Super Mario Bros. Where a full playthrough of the game takes maybe 30 minutes without using any warp zones. Zelda 2 is a meaty game with much slower pacing, so it stings way more having almost all of your progress revoked when you game over. Of course, I wouldn't know. I save scum through this whole game. Now usually when I fold and decide to place the odd save state, I use them sparingly and put them at appropriate spots in a level. Not here. I was save stating 4 times the screen. I don't think I've ever used more save states in a game. It was disgusting. I'll humbly accept fake gamer status for this one. I did still 100% DK64 however, so it balances out. The worst part is that, unlike with Metroid where save stating made the game tolerable, this shit was too ass for it to matter. This is a game about slowly learning sporadic enemy movements and attacking at the right time, but that doesn't really blend well with game overs that reset your character to level 1. In fact, it kinda discourages experimentation and encourages learning cheap strats. And even without the fear of game overs hanging over me, I still found myself having to redo enemy encounters over and over because dungeons last an eternity, and magic and health drops are a rarity within them, so losing a certain amount of either would mean a guaranteed loss against certain bosses. Sometimes I wasn't even able to progress further in the game without magic, forcing me to backtrack and farm enemies until they dropped some. It just isn't fun being knocked around by enemies with such unpredictable movement patterns for a whole game, wandering around a world that feels largely homogenous in a game that's supposed to be about adventure, talking to NPCs with dialogue so broken it takes me out of the experience. There was almost nothing for me to like here. Even the dungeons were mostly about just strolling around, fighting the same few enemies, and picking up keys, then backtracking through hallways, fighting even more of the same enemies, and then uh-oh, you went right? You dumbass, that's a dead end. Sorry, stupid, guess you're gonna have to waddle on back 4 screens to the elevator and go left this time. A Zelda game with 2D side-scrolling action combat is a really fun idea, but Zelda 2 does everything in its power to make sure no fun is had. Like I said earlier when talking about Sonic Rush, I'm at a point now where I've played like almost every major Sonic game, so I'm really just picking at scraps playing shit like Sonic Spinball. I tried playing Mean Bean Machine 2 actually, but I got stuck at the monkey fight. No one told me that game is really hard actually. Sonic Spinball is also really hard, but it seemed more doable than the monkey, so I played it instead. This is a freaky video game. The levels are gross and the bosses are horrific and the soundtrack just sounds dastardly. Remember when people said that Wet Dry World from Mario 64 has a negative emotional aura? That's this whole game. It actually felt like I should not have been playing it. But I did play it, and I'll say I'm not really a pinball guy, but even I could tell the physics here were a little screwy. Certain paths on these tables were way harder to reach than they should have been, and every once in a while Sonic would do some shit that would just piss me off. It's funny that a series all about pinball style momentum physics kind of fucked up the pinball physics for the one actual pinball game. The thing about pinball is that, like, it's always gonna feel a little unpredictable, even if you can technically work out the exact trajectory of the ball when hit by the flipper at a certain time. Combine that unpredictability with massive 10-minute stages and a game over system that starts you from the beginning of the game, and you're having something that rhymes with run, gun, fully loaded and placed in your mouth.
Maria!
There are only 4 levels in this game, but if you told me you reached the last level without using any cheat codes or save states, I would crown you the master gamer. I'm honestly proud of myself for just beating each level individually with the 3 lives the game gives you and not using save states on any of them. If there wasn't a cheat code for a level select, I am certain I would not have beaten all the stages in this game. Thankfully there was, so I did. It wasn't really fun, but I didn't hate it either. There was something about how aggressively bad the vibes of this game are that kept me going. Like, this isn't a good game, but it is kind of funny. I don't think I'll ever play it again though. There's only so much Sonic Spinball a man can take. And with that, we've gone through all the piece of shit games. Yippee! And what's even more yippee is that I finished Sonic Spinball the morning of Christmas Eve, and had a good feeling that Santa had a video game with my name on it in his sleigh. That game ended up being Astro Bot, and man, Santa couldn't have picked a better game for me to close out my year with. I adore 3D platformer games, in case you didn't know. Mario and Sonic are my 2 favorite game series after all. It's because of this actually that I wasn't too interested in checking out Astro Bot even after all the rave reviews for it started rolling in. There's this annoying narrative going around that 3D platformers are a dead genre, but there are like 5 that come out every year, you guys just don't play them. It was particularly aggravating hearing people talk about how Astro Bot revived a nostalgic genre only a few weeks after hearing that Evening Star was having financial troubles following the release of Penny's Big Breakaway. I malign the fact that a AAA publisher like Sony gets all the praise for reviving a genre that has been kept afloat by indies that are constantly being ignored. but really that annoyance was misplaced because Astro Bot makes it very clear that its developers, Team Asobi, have nothing but love in their hearts for both platformer games and PlayStation's history. It was so cathartic playing this and collecting bots of the Maiden in Black, Eco, and Alucard when I had just played their games earlier in the year. It warms my heart seeing characters like Klonoa and Sackboy, mascots from other PlayStation platformers who are largely irrelevant now and who both mean a lot to me, show up as bots too. Astro Bot presents all of these fan-servicey cameos with such a palpable sense of respect and admiration for their respective franchises, no matter how small, that it made it such an easy game to like. Even then, Astro's Playroom, the free tech demo that came with the PS5, was much the same in regard to how it handled its cameos, and while I liked that game, I had trouble seeing what all the hype was about. As someone who never really stopped playing platformers, it was a cute but very standard game that didn't do anything to stand out within the genre. I was worried after hearing everyone once again praise Team Asobi's latest release that Astro Bot would be much the same, only heavily appealing to casual fans of the genre, but I'm happy to report that I was so wrong. Team Asobi clearly had so many ideas for a full-length standalone Astro game following Playroom, and PlayStation giving them the go-ahead to run wild was one of the best decisions the company has made, period. Every moment of Astro Bot is all about pure, concentrated fun, made by people who know exactly how to curate it. It's a game with a reverence for the medium of video games, and it expresses that reverence not only through its myriad of cameos, but through its own playfulness. Whether I was going down a water slide together with a million animal bouncy balls, or turning Astro into a balloon so he can fly around a big aquarium, I had this ever-present feeling that this game was elated to exist and was sharing in that elation with me. It felt like a Kirby game, where yes, the experience was simplistic and easy, but there was so much variety and the levels were so crafty that the difficulty hardly mattered. If anything, it's a strength, because it made it easier to do exactly what the developers wanted me to. Have fun jumping around as a little robot dude. I feel like the name for Astro's Playroom would have been the perfect name for this game instead, because the whole thing really does feel like a playroom, with so many toys to mess around with all tossed together in a vibrant package. When Astro Bot took home the Game of the Year award, I found myself both skeptical and intrigued. Is this game really so good that it deserves to earn the title of Best Game of the Whole Year? Hell, even Mario has never accomplished that. Now, after having 100% completed the thing and loving every second of it, I can assure everyone watching this that, yeah, it totally deserves it. Because Game of the Year doesn't just mean the best game of the year. I touched on this earlier with Shadow Generations, but Game of the Year can also mean the most important game, or the most meaningful game of any given year. Astro Bot isn't the most important game to me personally from 2024, but it sent an important message to both Sony and the video game industry. A message saying that sometimes it's okay for a game to just be a simple, lower budget project that appeals to a smaller demographic and only takes a few years to make. Scope and sales potential are everything to investors, but creativity and fun are everything to players, and sometimes when a game nails both, it eclipses its projected sales potential and resonates with way more people than expected. It's heartwarming watching Astro become a mascot as beloved as all of the other mascots stuffed into his own game, and even more heartwarming seeing a game all about celebrating video games be just as celebrated by the people who play them. Goddamn, this ended up taking way longer than expected. I intended on getting this video out within the first 2 weeks of January, but I severely underestimated my own verbosity. Brevity and I are not yet acquainted. Still, even if everyone has already moved on from 2024 and begun dreaming about what 2025 might hold for the video game industry, I really enjoyed looking back at the games I played in 2024 and just talking about how they made me feel. It's nice being able to put all those feelings out there for someone to hear instead of just letting them float around in my head. After all, I'd want people to make stupid, overly long YouTube videos about my game if I ever made one. It could also just be fun to look back at this video in a few years and see how I felt about each of these games shortly after I first played them. Who knows, maybe in 10 years when I'm a huge WarioWare fan, I'll chuckle at myself for being foolish enough to call Smooth Moves anything other than a masterpiece. As of right now, I too find myself looking to the future. I mean, how could I not with a new Nintendo system just around the corner? We've got Metroid Prime 4, a new Mario Kart, and potentially even a new 3D Mario dropping in the next year or so, so there's certainly lots to be excited about. Strangely though, I find myself most excited to chip away at more of my backlog in the coming months and see if I've had any of my future favorites just waiting for me to discover them. I'd like to put out a good handful of videos this year too. I've wanted to start a YouTube channel for a long time, but always felt overwhelmed when I broke down all of the work that goes into making a video. Having made 2 now, it doesn't seem so daunting anymore. I'm excited at the prospect of discovering more of my own voice as I write and edit more videos throughout the year. And hey, even if I don't end up producing anything by the time 2026 rolls around, I hope to still be here again next January to talk about all the games I played between now and then. In the meantime, while you wait, go play some video games. Except for Sonic Labyrinth, you don't have to play that one.